Hold up. You think you've seen every great Western? Wrong. The 2000s quietly delivered some of the most brutal, mind-bending, soul-crushing neo-Western thrillers ever made, and most people completely slept on them. We're talking about films that demolished the myth of the Old West, reimagined outlaws as hollow men, and proved the genre could absolutely destroy you. These aren't your granddad's Westerns. These are films that'll haunt you for weeks. Ready? Let's ride. 10. Gran Torino, 2008. Clint Eastwood's Gran Torino isn't technically a traditional Western, but it's the ultimate neo-Western character study disguised as a grumpy old man. Story set in contemporary Detroit. Walt Kowalski is a Korean War veteran whose entire worldview has calcified around weaponry, ethnic suspicion, and an obsessive relationship with his pristine 1972 Gran Torino that represents everything he values about a vanished America. When his new Hmong neighbors arrive next door after his wife dies, Eastwood delivers what might be his most complex performance, playing a man fundamentally at war with modernity itself and his own capacity for change. The film centers on this impossible tension. Can a man this hardened by violence and prejudice actually grow, or is he irredeemably trapped by his own mythology? What makes Gran Torino devastating is how it completely subverts the revenge narrative that audiences expect from an Eastwood vehicle. You wait through the first act for him to go full vigilante, to gun down gang members in glorious action sequences that would make his spaghetti westerns look quaint. Instead, the film takes an unexpected turn, revealing that Kowalski's journey involves something far more spiritually complex than violent retribution. The script builds toward a finale that functions as genuine sacrifice rather than triumphant vengeance, which was shocking at the time. Eastwood's performance is minimalist mastery, expressed entirely through squinting eyes, jaw clenches, and loaded silences that communicate volumes about a man haunted by everything he's done and everything he's failed to prevent. The film tanked with critics initially, dismissed as preachy, one-dimensional, and unwilling to critique its protagonist's racism with sufficient harshness. The New York Times called it problematic, and serious critics largely avoided it. Years later, critics reassessed it as a brilliant meditation on masculine obsolescence and the price of holding on to resentment. Box office numbers told a completely different story, with the film becoming one of 2008's biggest surprises, grossing over $229 million worldwide and becoming Eastwood's most commercially successful film by that point. What critics eventually recognized is that the film's apparent preachiness actually functions as part of its critique, showing how difficult it is for someone like Kowalski to recognize and articulate the poison in his own thinking. The film asks an absolutely brutal question that resonates. With neo-Western themes, what's a gunslinger supposed to do when the frontier is gone and only he remembers how to fight? 9. Brokeback Mountain, 2005. Ang Lee's Brokeback Mountain arrives as a neo-Western romance that deconstructs masculine mythology and Western frontier ideals from an entirely unexpected angle, suggesting that maybe the greatest untold story in American cinema has always been about men loving men. Two cowboys, Ennis Del Mar and Jack Twist, meet on Brokeback Mountain during a summer sheep herding season and begin a relationship that will secretly define both their lives for the next 20 years. The film brilliantly locates traditional Western themes of freedom, rebellion, and individual choice within the intimate spaces between these men, exploring how the frontier myth becomes a prison when applied to love between men who cannot openly acknowledge their feelings. Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal deliver career-defining performances that shocked observers accustomed to their previous work. Ledger particularly inhabits Ennis with a quiet ache that speaks to decades of repression, shame, and longing expressed only through stolen moments. His performance communicates an entire emotional life through minimal dialogue and measured physicality. Gyllenhaal provides the perfect counterpoint as Jack, more openly affectionate and romantically frustrated by Ennis's refusal to imagine a different kind of life. Critics initially gave it mixed reviews, some immediately declaring it revolutionary, and others dismissing it as manipulative Oscar bait. The Academy nominated it for Best Picture, a shocking recognition for a film about gay cowboys, Yet the award went to Crash in a decision that sparked widespread accusations of cultural homophobia that persist to this day. The film expanded from a limited release of only 220 theaters to eventually 1,094 theaters over several weeks, eventually grossing $178 million worldwide and shocking absolutely everyone, including the filmmakers. What matters is how Brokeback Mountain uses the Western landscape not as mere backdrop, but as active character, a place of overwhelming beauty that simultaneously imprisons these men in their choices. The mountain becomes a sanctuary where they can exist as themselves, yet every descent back into civilization forces them to hide. The film challenges the traditional Western's obsession with male bonding by suggesting that maybe what matters most in these stories has always been about men loving men, just not in ways Hollywood dared acknowledge before. The real power emerges in understanding these cowboys are both protagonists and tragic figures of their own mythology, trapped between desire and social reality. Years after release, the film's reputation has only grown, with critics recognizing it as one of the decade's most important films. 8. Crazy Heart, 2009. Jeff Bridges plays Bad Blake, a washed-up country musician wandering through New Mexico in a beat to hell Chevrolet that serves as both his home and metaphorical anchor to a vanishing past. Directed by Scott Cooper in his feature directorial debut, Crazy Heart feels more like a country music ballad than a traditional thriller, yet it contains all the DNA of a neo-Western, including the aging outlaw figure, the redemption arc, the young woman who might save him, and the question of whether salvation arrives too late. Bridges gives a performance of devastating interiority, playing a man whose only remaining stable relationships are with whiskey, cigarettes, and the broken vehicles he drives from gig to gig. The film features original songs by Stephen Bruton and T-Bone Burnett, making the entire experience feel authentically rooted in American frontier culture and country music tradition. Blake stumbles through roadside bars and journalism appointments, barely holding together physically or emotionally until he meets Jean, a magazine writer played by Maggie Gyllenhaal, who represents an opportunity for connection he thought permanently lost. Their relationship becomes the emotional epicenter, with the film exploring whether redemption is even possible for someone like Blake, who has spent decades making destructive choices. Critics responded positively to the film's sincere emotional core, though the film never achieved massive box office success, grossing around $45 million domestically on a modest budget. What elevated Crazy Heart into conversation with other neo-Westerns is its unflinching portrait of male failure, and the possibility of grace arriving impossibly late. Bridges won a Golden Globe and an Academy Award for Best Actor, proof that audiences and institutions connected deeply with his depiction of a man slowly recognizing the accumulated cost of his choices and his failed relationships. The soundtrack became iconic in its own right, with the song Weary Willie becoming something of a hymn for anybody who'd ever felt completely lost or abandoned by their own decisions. Crazy Heart proves neo-Westerns don't require shootouts or traditional action to land their thematic punches about obsolescence, freedom, and the price of living only for yourself. The film's quiet power comes from its unwillingness to provide easy redemption, suggesting instead that some damage can be acknowledged but never fully repaired. 7. The Three Burials of Melquiades. Estrada, 2005. Tommy Lee Jones made his directorial debut with this absolutely stunning neo-Western that nobody saw in theaters, a commercial failure that represents one of cinema's great artistic successes. Set along the Texas-Mexico border in a landscape of bleached earth and endless sky, Pete Perkins is a ranch foreman who discovers his best friend, the illegal immigrant Melquiades Estrada, has been killed by a border patrol officer and hastily buried in an unmarked grave. Jones promised Melquiades he'd be buried in his hometown of Jimenez, Mexico, a promise that becomes the film's entire emotional center. What follows is an odyssey of redemption, where Pete kidnaps the officer responsible and forces him to help transport the corpse across the border through landscapes that seem determined to prevent their journey. The film premiered at Cannes and won Best Actor for Jones, yet grossed only $13.5 million against a $15 million budget. One of 2005's most significant box office disappointments, Critics immediately recognized it as one of the year's best films. Yet audiences stayed away in droves, perhaps unprepared for the film's unhurried pace and spiritual ambitions. The script by Guillermo Arriaga explores themes of loyalty, justice, and the arbitrary violence of the border system through a prism of genuine spirituality rather than political posturing. Jones and Barry Pepper, who plays the border officer Mike Norton, navigate a complex relationship where captor gradually becomes spiritual guide, forcing his captive to confront his own inhumanity and capacity for change. The cinematography by Chris Menges renders the Texas and Mexican landscapes with stunning brutality, all scrub desert and empty sky that seems to stretch infinitely. What makes The Three Burials essential is how it refuses easy politics, instead focusing on the profound obligation between friends that transcends national borders and class divisions. The journey becomes ritualistic, a pilgrimage through landscapes that haven't fundamentally changed since the actual Wild West era. Jones demonstrates surprising directing skill, handling a complex, non-linear narrative with grace and emotional intelligence. The film's box office failure shouldn't diminish its artistic accomplishment, representing exactly the kind of uncompromising artistic vision that defines peak neo-westerns and explains why audiences sometimes reject what critics immediately recognize as masterpieces. 6. The Proposition. 2005 John Hillcoat's Australian neo-western, set in the 1880s outback, features a premise so dark and morally twisted that it becomes absolutely hypnotic and deeply unsettling. After capturing outlaw brothers Charlie and Mikey Burns for rape and murder, Captain Stanley faces an impossible moral situation and creates an equally impossible proposition. He offers Charlie a choice that will destroy him spiritually, regardless of what he decides: kill his older brother Arthur within 9 days, or watch his younger brother Mikey hang on Christmas Day. Charlie accepts this devil's bargain, beginning a journey into the Australian wasteland that becomes something resembling spiritual punishment mixed with family tragedy. The screenplay by Nick Cave transforms the landscape into almost a character itself, a hostile environment that seems actively opposed to human survival and morality. Cave's score with Warren Ellis provides an unsettling, hallucinogenic atmosphere that creates dread even during quiet moments. Guy Pearce plays Charlie with wounded complexity, suggesting depths of feeling beneath a weathered exterior, while Ray Winstone brings brutal authority to Captain Stanley, a man trying to maintain order in an impossible situation. Danny Huston is absolutely terrifying as Arthur, the patriarch outlaw whose very existence creates the moral dilemma driving the entire narrative. Critics praise The Proposition as one of the finest westerns in recent memory, with the Chicago Reader calling it a perfect recreation of Sergio Leone's psychodramas filtered through Australian colonialism. Yet the film struggled at the box office, earning around $3 million domestically on a $10 million budget. What makes The Proposition an absolute masterclass in neo-Western construction is how it removes all romanticism from frontier violence and colonial expansion. There are no heroes here, only men making impossible choices in a harsh landscape governed by codes of honor that become increasingly meaningless. The film explicitly addresses colonialism and the brutal treatment of Aboriginal peoples, weaving these themes into its psychological drama rather than making them preachy. Cave and Ellis won critical recognition for their collaboration, establishing themselves as masters of neo-Western scores, and proving that rock musicians could create sophisticated film music. The Proposition is deliberately paced, occasionally languid, absolutely refusing to provide comfortable moments of relief or moral clarity. 5. There Will Be Blood. 2007. Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood shouldn't technically be classified as Western at all, yet it's absolutely one of the decade's greatest neo-Westerns and arguably Anderson's masterpiece. Set in early 1900s California during the oil boom that transformed America into an industrial nation, Daniel Plainview is a ruthless oil man whose only emotional connection extends to his adopted son, H.W., creating a relationship that becomes the film's emotional core. The film operates as an anti-Western, deliberately stripping away all romanticism from frontier expansion and replacing it with images of greed, industrial devastation, and spiritual emptiness. Instead of brave pioneers taming the wilderness and building civilization, we see greedy men destroying everything for profit and personal power. Daniel Day-Lewis delivers a performance of such controlled menace that comparisons to Citizen Kane and other cinematic titans feel not just appropriate but necessary. His plain view speaks in a growling monotone, moves with predatory calculation, and seems to occupy a different moral universe than everyone else. Anderson's direction is absolutely gorgeous and utterly bleak, with landscapes often obscured by oil derricks and industrial machinery that represents human ambition crushing nature. The film premiered at Venice and sparked immediate critical acclaim, yet divided audiences with its deliberately paced 2-hour and 38-minute runtime that refuses to provide easy narrative gratification. Critics praised Day-Lewis's hypnotic performance and Anderson's uncompromising vision, yet box office success remained modest, with the film earning around $40 million worldwide. What elevates There Will Be Blood into neo-Western territory is how it directly engages with American myths about expansion and manifest destiny, completely dismantling them through sheer artistic force. The relationship between Plainview and preacher Eli Sunday becomes the film's thematic center. Two men representing competing visions of American spirituality and both equally corrupt in their hunger for power. Johnny Greenwood's unsettling score heightens the film's apocalyptic mood, creating an atmosphere of doom lurking beneath every frame. There Will Be Blood proves neo-westerns can abandon traditional genre elements entirely, while maintaining thematic coherence about obsolescence, ambition, and the hollow nature of American success built on exploitation. 4. 3.10 To Yuma, 2007 James Mangold's remake of the 1957 classic, transforms itself into a lean, tense psychological thriller about masculinity in crisis and the strange respect that can emerge between mortal enemies. Christian Bale plays Dan Evans, a desperate rancher facing foreclosure and personal humiliation, who volunteers to escort notorious outlaw Ben Wade to a train leaving at 3:10 for Yuma prison, a job most men consider suicide. Russell Crowe absolutely steals the film as Wade, oozing charisma and menace while simultaneously engaging in philosophical conversations with Evans about the nature of good and evil and whether these categories have any meaningful existence. What makes 3:10 to Yuma genuinely devastating is how it suggests these moral categories might be completely meaningless. Wade treats Evans with casual kindness, despite being a murderer responsible for countless deaths, while Evans is willing to do morally questionable things for money to save his family. The film premiered to positive reviews, with critics immediately recognizing Bale and Crowe's chemistry as electric and fascinating. Box office performance proved strong, earning $71 million worldwide on a $48-55 million budget, representing a genuine commercial success that proved audiences would accept philosophical complexity. What distinguishes 3:10 to Yuma from traditional westerns is its psychological depth and willingness to complicate morality beyond the simplistic good versus evil framework. The screenplay treats its narrative as character study rather than action vehicle, focusing on conversations and ethical negotiations rather than gunfights and chases. Feed on Papa Michael's cinematography creates a world of harsh shadows and blinding sunlight, perfectly visualizing the moral ambiguity that permeates every scene. The film's final act has generated considerable debate among viewers, with some finding it satisfying and others considering it implausible or too neat. Regardless, 3:10 to Yuma represents neo-westerns at their most commercially viable, proving audiences would accept philosophical complexity mixed with genuine thrills. Crowe and Bale both delivered performances worthy of serious awards, consideration, creating characters that feel lived in and authentic despite the film's heightened circumstances. 3. The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, 2007. Andrew Dominik's epic meditation on celebrity, mythology, and the destructive power of obsession stands as one of the decade's most polarizing and misunderstood films. Brad Pitt plays Jesse James, a paranoid outlaw in his final years, surrounded by sycophants and admirers who want to use him for fame or money, while Casey Affleck plays Robert Ford, a young criminal whose initial adoration gradually transforms into resentment and violent desire for recognition. Dominic's film is deliberately paced to the point of challenging endurance, featuring a 160-minute runtime that many found excessive and unnecessary. Yet the deliberate pacing becomes part of the film's genius, building psychological tension as Ford's jealousy and need for acknowledgement festers. Roger Deakins delivers cinematography of breathtaking beauty, creating images that simultaneously evoke both classical westerns and Victorian-era paintings with their composition and color palette. Nick Cave and Warren Ellis provide a score simultaneously haunting and melancholic, creating an atmosphere of doom and historical inevitability. The film opened in limited release and quickly expanded, earning less than $4 million domestically, one of the decade's biggest box office disasters and commercial failures. Critics remain deeply divided, with some calling it a masterpiece of psychological portraiture and others dismissing it as self-indulgent and pointless. Mark Kermode immediately named it his best film of 2007, predicting historians would eventually recognize it as an absolute masterpiece, while others found it too slow, too long, and ultimately empty of genuine insight. What matters about The Assassination is how it deconstructs the myth-making process underlying Western narratives and celebrity culture. James becomes increasingly paranoid as he recognizes Ford's resentment, while Ford becomes trapped by his inability to escape his idol's shadow or achieve the recognition he desperately craves. The violence, when it arrives, comes suddenly and brutally, stripping away any romanticism from murder. Deakins and Dominic create a world of faded color and dusty light that feels simultaneously ancient and modern, existing outside normal time. The film's box office failure shouldn't diminish its artistic accomplishment, representing exactly the kind of uncompromising artistic vision that defines peak neo-westerns and explains why truly challenging art often struggles commercially. 2. No Country for Old Men, 2007. The Coen brothers' adaptation of Cormac McCarthy's novel functions as the definitive neo-western thriller, combining genre elements with literary ambition and creating something that transcends its source material. After discovering $2 million from a drug deal gone bad, Llewellyn Moss becomes hunted by Anton Chigurh, a psychopathic hitman whose motivation remains entirely mysterious and whose methods seem to operate according to codes nobody else comprehends. Tommy Lee Jones plays aging Sheriff Bell, struggling desperately to maintain order in an increasingly lawless world that seems to have fundamentally changed beyond his ability to understand or affect. Javier Bardem's Chigurh is simultaneously terrifying and oddly sympathetic, a man operating according to some personal code of ethics that makes sense only to him. His haircut becomes iconic. His captive bolt pistol becomes the film's most memorable weapon, and his conversations reveal a philosophy that suggests free will might be illusion. The film premiered at Cannes to positive reception and achieved genuine commercial success, earning $171 million worldwide against a $25 million budget, becoming the Coens' biggest box office hit at the time, and proving challenging art could reach mass audiences. Critics praised absolutely every element, from Roger Deakins' stunning cinematography capturing landscapes and interiors with equal mastery, to the performances, to the screenplay's remarkable fidelity to McCarthy's prose while creating something distinctly cinematic. The film became ubiquitous on critics' year-end lists, appearing on more such lists than any other 2007 film, establishing itself as the year's consensus masterpiece. It won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, making it only the 4th Western ever to achieve that honor and the first in decades. What makes No Country for Old Men? The definitive neo-Western is how it completely dismantles any pretense that justice or moral order exist in the world. Characters make sensible decisions and still die. The supposed protagonist dies off-screen, denying audiences the satisfaction of his story. The aging lawman becomes a witness to chaos he cannot comprehend or influence. 1. No Country for Old Men, 2007. Actually, this absolutely has to be number 1 because it achieved what no other neo-Western of the 2000s managed: complete artistic and commercial success while defining the entire movement for a generation. No Country for Old Men stands apart from its peers because it accomplished something nearly impossible, creating a film of absolute artistic integrity that also became a genuine cultural phenomenon, affecting how millions of people understood cinema. It won Best Picture when competing against There Will Be Blood, a decision some cinephiles have questioned retrospectively. Yet the Coens film remains more rewatchable, more quotable, and more influential in shaping how filmmakers approach neo-westerns in the years since. What makes it unquestionably number one is simply this. It proved to Hollywood that audiences would accept a western that completely rejected traditional narrative comfort and satisfaction. It proved that a film could be bleak, ambiguous, and morally complicated, while still achieving massive commercial success and critical adoration. The cultural impact cannot be overstated or underestimated. Anton Chigurh became instantly iconic, one of cinema's great villains, despite minimal screen time. Call It Friendo became a meme before memes existed in their current form, representing the film's quotable dialogue. Roger Deakins' cinematography influenced an entire generation of cinematographers working in multiple genres. The film's influence ripples through every neo-western made since, from Hell or High Water to Wind River to Sicario to True Detective. Critics have only grown more enthusiastic about the film over time, with many now considering it not just the best western of the 2000s, but genuinely one of the greatest films ever made, period. Its 93% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes reflects almost universal critical consensus that has only solidified. No Country for Old Men doesn't just represent the best of 2000s neo-westerns. It essentially defined what the entire form could achieve when filmmakers treated it with absolute seriousness and refused to compromise their artistic vision for commercial concerns. These 10 films represent the 2000s at its absolute peak for neo-western cinema, proving the genre could evolve into something darker, more philosophical, and far more psychologically complex than anyone reasonably expected. Now, here's what I desperately need from you. Which of these films destroyed you the most emotionally? Did No Country leave you existentially disturbed? Did the assassination of Jesse James haunt you for weeks afterward? Or does Brokeback Mountain remain the one that hit your heart hardest? Drop your most controversial takes in the comments right now. Tell me which neo-western I absolutely butchered by not including on this list. Settle this debate right here.